Yeah, important thing there was the bike mechanics stand. And the reason that we figured that out way back in time was because I had a previous company on making mud guards for bikes. So we had lots of bikes hanging in the office. Yeah. So realized they're really sturdy and good.
Awesome.
And for this purpose, it's perfect. So I can sit here, you can see my hands when going to build or play mode, as I say. And pretty easy to change camera. So I haven't tried this before, so it's the first time. So you have to give feedback during the session.
Yeah. Happy Wednesday, Sam. Happy Wednesday, Christine. Happy Wednesday, Maria. Andreas, good to see you as well. Welcome. Okay.
We're on time. Oh, yeah.
All right. So we will just get started in just a moment. So everyone, tell me something you're feeling today. You know, write in the chat. How are you feeling today? Are you excited? I know for many of you, you might be getting ready to decorate your classroom spaces or your homeschooling space after school programs. How are you feeling? Hello, Colleen. Welcome, welcome. Andreas is excited. Eric, how are you? Tell us how you're feeling.
Me, yeah. Today I'm good. I'm getting energized by meeting other humans in the world. We just had a thunderstorm here in Gothenburg.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very, very humid and very, very warm. So I'm like, it's lucky. I'm a bit sticky.
You're a bit sticky, as in it's humid and pretty hot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's good. This
Wonderful.
actually picked me back up. I was drifting away mentally for a while there, and then somebody was fixing a climate air conditioner just next door, and then the power went just before this. So we're lucky I'm here on camera with internet.
Well, we're very lucky to have you, Eric, today.
Thank you for having me. I don't know if you're lucky though.
Well, I think we're all lucky to have each other, to help each other in this wonderful collaborative group. And I see that Christine has been participating in a lot of professional development the past few weeks, and she's excited about all the learning. But you know, I can also understand how you could be really tired as well, Christine, that it's like overwhelmingly awesome content everywhere. You know, from webinars to pre-recorded content, everyone is providing free resources more than ever, but it can be in a way very overindulging, kind of like going into a candy store where there's so many delicious good things out there, but it can be too much very quickly. So, all right, welcome everyone to the Strawbees City Building and the Sustainable Development class, part 3. So today we'll be focusing on myself, Lindsay, and Eric Tolshenson. Can you describe to some of our participants that maybe aren't aware of who you are? Can you just give us a very brief introduction to who you are and what you do?
Yeah, try to be brief. I'm inventor of Strawbees. That's one thing I am, but I'm a mechanical engineer and I love building things and playing. I think what I've been honing the past 15 years is being better at playing as a grown-up, and then by doing that you engage all ages around you. I think everybody's just waiting to play. So I'm really happy to be joining you guys to see if you want to play with me today. So yeah, I don't know if that really describes it, but sometimes people, mechanical engineer can sound a bit intimidating. I've heard that sometimes, but especially in Gothenburg, it's not always a good thing, because then they think you work at Volvo and you're not fun. I don't know, but I have lots of friends at Volvo, and I can assure you that they're fun. So that's me. Yeah. very brief and weird. From lived in London when I was 3 to 6 years old, and then I moved to a city of 3,000 people, or a tiny town, rural, of 3,000 people. So I have also experienced both living in a big city and a small city when I was a kid, which was also interesting. Talking about city building and scale.
Yes, Christine was mentioning that in her experience, mechanical engineers are very fun and creative. And I actually can agree with that. I think that a lot of mechanical engineers I tend to meet have a very playful, very hands-on experience. And even if they're not like, you know, maybe they don't seem as, I mean, so I think mechanical engineers can be a group of individuals that tend to be very quirky if they want to be, because I tend to see impractical engineering projects. Like you can see all sorts of great ideas that come from mechanical engineers, and of course other fields as well. Yeah. But I think it's great having you, you know, in the Planar on the Strawbees education team, you know, to help us like kind of expand more of the impractical engineering aspects.
I'm happy to be here.
So, just to kind of recap on the last 2 weeks. So in part one, we did a very brief introduction to the Sustainable Development Goals, and then also thinking about how to build buildings. So we gave you a few resources to work with to start building kind of a wireframe for a building. So the stacking tower, using cubes and cones like pyramids, and being able to build like a basic body, building shapes. And then on part two, we focused more on expanding into buildings. So last week, James did kind of a more live, open-ended building experience where he was kind of building and shaping as he went along based off the map and the drawing that he created. And I kind of pre-built basically a cone cylinder shape for my school, adding paper and learning how to teach you how to produce puncture cardboard and attach Strawbees to it, as well as other ideas. So just kind of taking the cube and transforming it into different shapes, like a hexagonal prism. And what we're gonna be doing today is we're gonna be starting to think about from the micro scale, where we were building like an individual building, and starting to think about the placement of multiple buildings. So being able to think in the macro where you're expanding the cityscape. So thinking about the landscape that the city will live on, and as well as starting to think about how you would incorporate the Sustainable Development Goals. So I'll give you a short presentation on how we're going to achieve this. So thinking about the task one, so there's going to be basically two tasks that we'll be focusing on today. So last week, here's like the example that I shared with the community park school. So many of us are really passionate educators that on the micro scale, we wanted to focus on redesigning school. So some of us drew examples, some of us started building right away. So I kind of wanted to share the process to recap how we built it. So this is kind of my drawing that I started with that was more of a cylinder shape. And then I started to actually build it based off the drawing, although everyone's process is different. So some people might go right into the building process. So again, starting to build from the micro and starting to shape the landscape. So here I used like paper and cardboard to kind of create a very basic scene. And I kind of color coded it with green and black paper, using the cardboard the brown of the cardboard to represent mountains. So starting to think about the landscape of where the city is, and even starting to think about the bodies of water where maybe it could be fresh or ocean water, so salt water. And then, you know, in that task, starting to expand into the macro. So when you start to build all these buildings, what are the relationship between the different buildings? So one building could be a school, but what else would you need in the city? Would you need something like restaurants or a farm nearby the school? Thinking about the housing, a forest. So starting to really expand off the building that you've created and starting to think about how does the citizens of the city start to interact with each other. And as part of task 2, thinking about the Sustainable Development Goals. So back in part 1 of this class, we focused on learning about the Sustainable Development Goals, where there are 17 different goals that you can achieve in a city. So, you know, for more ideas, we also have on our learning platform, learning.strawbees.com, we have /SDGs. We have a site that kind of gives you some inspiration and ideas drafted about how you can try to achieve some of the goals in your cityscape. So what I started to expand on in the SDGs here is thinking about, you know, in the school setting, if we think about the school building, that I want to try to accomplish quality education. So with quality education, I might be thinking about education that maybe is very inclusive. So offering different courses for different learning levels, classes for special needs, as well as maybe for students that need to be facilitated in a different language. But also I wanted, as part of my school, I wanted to actually do reduced inequalities. So I've started to actually incorporate more of an accessibility. So in my school setting, I wanted to make it so all the classes were able to collaborate. So you had the 6th grade and kindergarten on the same level, but you were also able to migrate and travel down the school, but also thinking about how you can interact. So it was more of a community-based school. And in the reduced inequalities, I wanted to think about some of the students that maybe want to be part of that experience of traveling up through the school, but maybe not necessarily taking an elevator and missing out on these brief interactions in the school. So I started to incorporate an accessibility ramp involved in here. And then another thing I started to expand on is thinking about farm food, maybe that I want the school cafeteria to have access to fresh produce, fresh vegetables in the school. So trying to reduce zero hunger. So having students that maybe cannot pay for lunches, trying to provide free paid lunch for students that maybe need that subsidized cost. Also thinking about life on land. So thinking about the more sustainable practices of consumption and creating and consumption with the produce that is involved with the farms. So these are things to start to think about when you are creating your city, that when you start to, you know, expand from the micro, so the single building that you've created, and start to expand on the macro, you know, thinking about how you can apply these different sustainability measures. So now what I want to do is I want to kind of focus on Eric, because Eric wants to actually start to show you the possibilities of building and expanding on the macro scale. So he has a fantastic setup in the Strawbees HQ where he's going to show you how to create, like, you know, a modular system. So very similar to what we did with the stacking tower, where you know, you have a few cubes and a pyramid on the top, but starting to expand your city using that thinking. So Eric, can you show us a little bit about your process of, as you called it, I think before, city sketching?
Yeah, exactly. It's my turn already. I'm super happy about that. So the thing is, there is so much to talk about how we actually build cities and look at and observe. And one way of actually making that information get set in your brain is actually trying out copying a cityscape, or actually looking at it from a macro perspective as an architect. So I'm, once again, a mechanical engineer, but I've actually studied quite a lot of architecture because I think it's so much fun. So I was doing a lot of sketches. A problem with building models and sketching is that you need to be pretty good at it, especially the architecture models. But you know, as you see, we can play with it in many different ways. But one thing that I would like to include here is like looking at it in a pretty abstract level. So I would start with just showing, for example, building lots of these modules, just like you said, building lots of modules and then sketching a city and showing how scale affects your perception of these very abstract shapes, and which actually can open up lots of very interesting discussions. So I'm going to zoom into my table now, and we'll start with one building. So hopefully this works. I don't know if there's a cool way of attaching two cameras. Can I be two participants? Because that could also be cool. But is anybody there for?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
so in the
I'll just.
you can switch the video in your feed.
I know that exactly, but I was like, is there a secret way to actually have both? But I won't do that. So there, let's see.
It would be easier to do it this way, just switching between it.
Here we are. Oh, now it's blurry. Okay, now. So, oh, why is it? Oh, now we see my hand. Okay, what is this auto? So we were, it was working brilliantly when we started out, you saw before. So let's see if I can get, is it looking for my face or something? So let's take just a basic shape. What I've done here before, and what I like to do with the kids or with any kind of students is actually looking just at lots of these simple modules. What does this simple module represent to you? And what makes you perceive this module in different ways? So I've been not like touching upon this just before, but if anybody wants to answer, this is weird because I'm so used to actually talking through so people answer me, but I will show you from my point of view when we start this. This can be a lot of different things depending on primarily the scale. And what's the scale that's important is human scale. So what is a human in relation to this piece? So what I like doing is using some classic tricks that architects use. So I actually print out tons of humans. So let's try one big human here. So you see this, and now this is a very small room. So depending on the scale, you see it. Now it's not really macro level, but it's like a room. So you can actually build with, this is, you know, you've shown a lot of houses with walls and stuff, but this is actually where you build the negative space. You actually, this is the room that an individual is into. This is a very small room, unfortunately. So let's try another scale. And is this, can you see those tiny things there?
They're a little hard to see because it's very thin black lines, but I think roughly we get the idea.
I'll zoom in here. Let's go down and forward a bit. Sorry for
Live from the inventor's desk. I love it. It's kind of like we're having an insight into your brain and your process. It's like a sketchbook in a way, but in the more physical realm.
So exactly. So now you're part of me sketching also how to try this presentation. So yeah, that's a good feedback that I should have had them filled in. But the scale here is very important. So now this is almost a two-story building. I think it's a little bit short. This is just a very airy room for one person. But if you switch it this way, it actually shifts where this house could be in the world. Actually, from my point of view, if you look at this, where do they have this kind of form factor for a house? And one thing that I immediately see is this is a strange kind of pretty small house, but this is Tokyo, looks like this. The form factor is Tokyo. So then I would like to do some repetitions. So when we start sketching houses, what does a neighborhood look like? And one thing you work with is the modules and repetitions of buildings. So then we have a couple of different modules. We start building repeating structures. But if this would be in Sweden, I think this could be something that would be closer to a, what's that called, residential? This is one house and a garage, one house and a garage.
Like a residential neighborhood.
Yeah, exactly. You see, this is a classic thing here in Sweden that they put them in rows like this.
Eric, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Sam, oh, actually it's Sam's question, but I want to relay it to you. So Sam was asking about, should we think about using a grid system? So, you know, like in cityscapes that, you know, especially in the US, they tends to be like a more grid system with housing, or maybe in a city like New York City, in like lower Manhattan to upper Manhattan, it tends to be very like grids that are pretty 90-degree parallel. Is that like a good measure to work with?
I mean, this is the thing. I think this is what's interesting. So you, in a class, you should pick different parts of the world and see how they are building houses, how they're placing buildings. So when you say the grid system, that's very common in the US. And very important thing here is like the negative space between buildings is where the humans are actually outside of the house. So what I have this paper here is representing a part of the city that these a group of students get to actually build and describe what's happening in this part of the city. And then I start building all these different things. So what kind of house, depending on the scale of human you use here, these can be very different buildings. So I'll go even further down. We start looking, if you have a tiny little human here, tiny humans, then these are actually becoming these residential buildings. And maybe there's 3-4 flats in one of these. But if you look at, let's say the grid structure is one cool thing to look at. So I would like to look at a city, for example, New York has that perfect like grid. But then you look at Amsterdam, which is like these weird curves with water in between, and all houses are standing like this instead. So they're next to each other. It's like this, if I don't know how many have been to Amsterdam, but to understand how the architects and how a city is built up it's a very good way to just copy it and look at the scale of, I think this would be a human that's basically this size. So this is the kind of play that I've been doing. I do this with actually more university students here in Gothenburg in architecture and technology course they have. But playing with this and describing the different roles of these houses and buildings is equally fun in any age. But what I would like, the fun thing is actually building a really big structure. So each group would have one of these A2 pages basically, and making a part of a city with some roads. Is this a residential area or is it a shopping area? So the size would make this into a very strange building. So this is more like a library building because combined to this person, it's a huge block. So now obviously through camera, this can be hyper abstract for you, but, oh, sorry, I hit that one. But this is the kind of play I've been doing. And you can actually open up the entire classroom floor and build this city. So for example, we want, what do we need in the city? Mm-hmm. Just like you've been talking about before. And then actually building these blocks that represent that. And it's just this wireframe city. So I actually have lots of modules. And so I can build, and something happens with the interpretation of a building in relation to a human. What these houses can actually represent and what they would be. And I think those kinds of explorations are just as fun as what you've been doing before. You've been working with very high detail levels, but these are just the abstract representations. And you could, for example, do the grid. You can do a suburban area, what happens there. I was starting on that with my little house modules there and how the roads go through the suburban area. And when you collaborate, you can build much bigger things than you would do otherwise. So it's first thing I would do.
I think what you're creating is like basically building blocks. With the Strawbees, you're using them as building blocks to build these like geometric shapes that take up space. Yeah. Because I believe in part 1 and 2, we even talked about how you can, change the size of the straw. So like the blue straws are right now 24 centimeters and the pink ones are 12 centimeters. So you suddenly kind of can really play with the shape, but in a way you're building the blocks.
Yeah, I'm just building pure blocks and using them as abstract representations. And that might sound a bit weird, but what's really interesting in that is that your brain, you will see that you start interpreting these structures as completely different things depending on the scale of the human you will put inside. So I can really recommend actually playing around with that a bit in this. So that's one of the things that I've been doing. And I like doing like these big classroom experiences because every time I come in, obviously it becomes a very different situation. But that's something I really like. And then you look at, for example, skyline, you look at the dynamics of a city. For example, if you look at Sam, if you talk about the grid versus some more complex structures, what are the effects of having a grid-based city? So for example, it's this very, very long, you can see if a long distance. Like if you look at this, you start putting, let's just make a mini grid here and say that these represent tall buildings. And because in architecture, you talk about this density also, like, is it a dense area, or what do we need? And another thing you can see is like coziness. What happens with coziness? If you can see throughout the city and you can't see, you see too many blocks far away, you actually decrease that thing. But, oh, sorry again. But so these are the kinds of explorations that I like to do. And so basically you can just let them, either you pick a scale in the beginning and that will define the entire activity, and playfulness, some sketching an entire cityscape, even within the 1 hour lesson, basically. So what we work with as architects, we look through, I can actually flash back to me a bit here. So, because now I have the camera in front of me. So setup was not perfect. There's some improvements. I love that. But let's see if we can go back here.
I think quite a few individuals love your very DIY setup, especially for the studio scape. So we get to see from the mind of the inventor's desk.
Yeah. But so we start out with this just looking at the scale. What is the size we need? And if we need a hospital, how do they look? What's the scale of human towards a hospital building, for example? So we actually start understanding the flow of humans, because that's one of the very important things of the city, is the humans have to be not only in the houses, but around them, in between them. Are there cars? What's the experience of this neighborhood? So one thing that I really liked, I was talking to you before, Lindsay, is actually doing this little virtual walkthrough of your cityscape. So you start with these abstract buildings, but you can actually map them up and panel them up and draw the building size on the sides. I've done that quite some times, but before I want to sketch them, use these abstract shapes first, and then you go into making it more detailed. And but that's the thing, that's where you can dig in for hours on end. But then this sketching phase is just playing around. And yeah.
So Eric, like, you know, we got to see kind of like the brief sketch. What can we see how you get more detailed? Can you show us that?
No, that's actually unfortunately not something that I have had time to prepare, because this has been so. But we can post that. I can actually send some of the walls, because one thing that we do a lot at home is when we go to detail. Once we set the scale, for example, we can have the dollhouse scale. That's a pretty big doll. They're that big, 1 to 10 or something. That takes a bit more time doing, but if you would say this, we can take this scale, little person, it's like half a finger. So that is the classic biometric measurement. That's actually a bit faster. So you can, you work with just like drawing on paper on the sides, and then you could even make one thing that I like. Now we're looking at cities, then it's a bit different. Like you did before with the modules, you can actually use each of these as being a room, and then have different rooms connected to each other. That is, now we're going into the micro scale again. But those kinds of modules are really, really fun to work with. So they, like, even building a house with that kind of detail and modules, and just saying this is where the doors will be, is another kind of activity that I've also been playing with. So I'm just, for this webinar, I'm just, the things I have done in terms with city building is using that. But then of course, it could be just as fun as you showed. These are just being very sketchable and changeable items. But maybe if I do, I don't know if I can be that fast in making a wall or something, but no, I think I just want to be able to play with what the different parts of the city would look like. High density parts, central big city parts are very different. Then you would choose blocks like these, the high rises, and not have the detailed scale, but it still represents what the city needs to have.
I want to ask you, because you're kind of the king of towers.
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, what about like, if you want to make something so tall, like especially with what you just held up, that sketch block that you I call it a sketchbook because
Yeah.
that's what you called it before the planar.
Yeah.
But how would you build a base to support it?
Oh, you mean to build this one tall?
Yeah,
or?
like if you like, you know how sometimes some students are like, imagine really big, like they want large skyscrapers, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
because some students might be in a city like New York City, so they tend to
yeah.
think very, vertically. So, versus horizontally, they think about very tall buildings. What are suggestions you have for creating a base for super tall structures?
So the first step, I mean, there's so many ways of doing that, but I would just stay to a very simple way, which is have a regular piece of paper as the base, because that you can extend that, because that's basically a root system. You just don't want it to topple over too easily. So if you can have a cardstock, if it's really tall, you need that. But most buildings, if you build them symmetrically and keep it balanced, it will actually stand anyway. Maybe I should pick a tower somewhere in the office because we have so many big towers. But for example, what's interesting when you build that could be a pretty interesting construction effort would be using these as rooms and then building a tower where each level has 4 of these rooms, and then you could actually make floor planning instead. I mean, to build a base, I would just keep it simple. You don't have to do anything advanced for building your tower base, as long as you build it straight. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Well, maybe you could take a moment to go find a tower, since I know that there are quite a few towers.
I'll see if I have a couple of towers here.
Yeah. And, while Eric searches for a tower, which, the Strawbees HQ, as you may imagine, has a lot of Strawbees projects, especially really large, tall towers. And, just kind of commenting, Sam, I really like what you were mentioning about how the Strawbees pieces are really nice for changing your prototypes. What we've talked about in previous webinars, in planars, is that sometimes when you disconnect, the structure, like the standing tower, for example, still relatively holds its shape, but I can use it as a way to quickly exchange, different straw sizes. And I can actually make it even a little bit bigger, or I can make one side of it, maybe a little bit taller. Maybe I want it to start to curl, so I can start to expand it and rapidly prototype. So maybe the idea that I create, even though I might achieve what I was trying to build in the first place, maybe I start to sketch, just like what Eric was mentioning, that I can just modify and, eventually I can make this maybe a building that kind of curls within itself. So it could be a fun direction to go out of. And Mumtaza, I saw that you were mentioning about that there's a redevelopment project in India. And then there's like a big makeover for free homes for 20,000 people. It's really interesting. I mean, I'd love to hear more, or if you have like a link to this kind of development, it would be really interesting to, hear more about how communities are actually trying to provide more free homes. So redesigning a community for, expansion of space. Oh, that's lovely. You are very quick to send that. So I will make sure to copy all the resources and links shared in the chat at the end of this planar. So all resources that we share to each other, so from the Strawbees education team or for our attendees, we'll definitely be able to share it. Oh, Eric.
Let's see if that's the problem with the Strawbees structures tend to get insane, really, really big. That's what I wanted to show, that this is a macro. When you want to go macro, it's more about the scale inside, because like what's the human size in relation to this? This is if you take this human scale, this is obviously one of the tallest high rises in the world. It's like 60 stories or something, or like 100. But we can say it. So both of these towers are freestanding. So you see, these are actually been cut down so I could fit them in here. So I just took off the tops. So obviously you will need to visit Gothenburg and come here and play with me on this scale. So this is obviously a large city building. You could, so you see here that the only problem with this structure now is because I took the top off, I have little connectors sticking out in the bottom. So when you come to the base, if you talk about building a base for this, the most important part would be to actually replace these with ones. And that's where we come into the features of Strawbees, being able to change your structure actually at the very end. This could be finished, and then we would have to rebuild the base to make it stand. But in this case, it's just replace it, or keep it even simpler, just fold up the tabs of, of the threes. But I want to show you, when you asked about, this is obviously a really good structure because it has a square base, it's even. If you look at the blue lines here, you see that there's blue lines. This is actually a helix. So this is, you can see it's a twisted tower. But so this one will stand really well on its own because it just stays balanced. This is from our chain reaction just a couple of weeks ago. I really enjoy chain reactions. I'm just going to take this one off because I don't want to have that on the, or we could just imagine what that protrusion on the top was on our building. And that's something you could also engage quite a lot of students in. But let's go in for another base that isn't so good.
Yeah, I think especially with the base building, since you're showing us, because your original sketch, you had very small ones, which can stand up. But I think when you start to build really big, because we have those big imaginative thinkers in the classroom, what are the ways, the methods that we can do it? What can we do to attach it to a strong base?
I would actually, because the straws won't have any problem with it. So, you know, I want to avoid as much tape as possible to keep fixing things easy. But to tape a small base to a card piece in the bottom, that is not a big problem because you're not taping the entire structure. You can actually remove it. So when we use our new standards here, obviously this length will be the same. So say that this will be a tower base and we want to build from this. Should we build a high rise using this?
Yeah.
This base and the pieces we have.
Yeah.
So I'll just take
and while you do that, some of our lovely attendees is mentioning in the chat that some of the grid city that you made earlier, Christine was commenting that it was feeling kind of crowded, like she might want to, you know, spread the buildings like the houses. Exactly. And Mutaza was also saying, you know, the skyscraper city also makes him feel like it's suffocating because, you know, the window, you can see from window to window. So across the way, you see into another window of a skyscraper. So maybe thinking about how to design a city with skyscrapers where there's enough space, enough blue space to skyscraper space, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. But that's also what we talked about. That's exactly one of the things. I will actually put down a document on things that we discuss or that I like to discuss, and that is, we talk about the space and negative space, the space in between. What you're talking about now is also the visual experience when you're a human in between these spaces, or actually in the house looking through if you block the other house's views, it can be a bit cramped. Density is one of those things. So you can look at different densities in cities. And when density, I mean how many humans are there per space. And obviously a high rise is a very high density structure. So it's efficient in terms of how many people can actually live there. And in certain places that is really good. In Sweden, we have incredibly low density in certain parts of Sweden. So my family comes from the northern parts of Sweden. And there's like, it's a 1 hour drive between the neighbors. So that's the closest person they have is like far in between. So there's obviously different things that this is typically a tangent. But now I'm going to zoom down here on this. So when we talk about this would be the base of a high rise. Let's see if I can put it back here. I would just secure one of these bases too. This is just a post-it note or a big post-it note. And actually, do I even have tape here? But let's see. And all of you here would actually be, I'm going to bring all my little modules and let's build a cool high-rise using these.
I think it's great that we get to build along with you. We get to, you know, facilitate this building experience. So for many of you that are building at home, you can also build a series of cubes, maybe rectangles, and start stacking. Follow along with a piece of paper or some cardboard. Build with us.
So, and I mean, obviously now we come into some of the troubles with Strawbees because we only have wireframes, so you won't be able to stack that way efficiently. So then you have to figure that out. I'm just going to temporarily fix this. So obviously now the stacking starts to fail. So that's actually why we need to connect them. But it's not the base that's failing in this case. But I don't know if I even can show my. So we actually are launching a new thing that is the clip to be able to stack shapes like this together really, really fast. Yeah. But let's show what actually exists today. Maybe I know you showed using the double Strawbee, didn't you? And
yeah, we've been using the 2-leg Strawbees.
Yeah. Can you see me even here?
But what Eric is mentioning, which I can also mention to everyone in the class, that we do have a 3D print of a double-sided clip that is a way for younger students, especially like in the kindergarten range, that can easily build the cubes. Because we find that kindergartners can build the cubes, but sometimes the hardest part is putting the 2-legged Strawbee between the cubes to stack it.
Yeah.
So we made this like 3D clip. So you can snap it on and then you can stack it very rapidly, but also you can kind of create motion and movement between the cubes.
Yeah. And there's lots of fun exploration to be done in that too. But so obviously you see the other towers that I showed, they are going up really fast. So now you see, I'm just going to show a couple of interesting tricks here. So you see, you don't want this to be able to open and close like that. Do you see me when I'm building here?
Yeah.
That's a problem. So how do you solve that? So then you just slide one on top of the straw like this. Because to fix something in space, you need 3 points. And now this would actually be enough to fix it. Now we have stack cubes. Obviously, this is a bit more cumbersome than just using the clip. So I'm going to see if I can actually find the clip. If you want me to go find that. Now let's use what we have here. So obviously this is a bit more time consuming. So then it's less of sketching blocks, but it's also really interesting to build these high rises with the different levels and spaces in between here. And if you look at high rises, a lot of them you want to work with, just like somebody was commenting on that you are blocking the view. So sometimes they go out to be able to have more space, and you can do, I'll just make a little sliding structure here. So I can model my high rise a bit. And, but the reason we made that clip was I saw, especially for kindergarten, it was so much fun to just build those big structures that are actually around them in a speed that was, like if each kid builds 2 or 3 cubes in a class of 12 kids or something, then you have a really, really, really large scale playroom to build with, and they can walk inside the objects they build. So now I'm building a sky high rise with some weird protrusion. So obviously everything becomes sketches because we are not about precision. We're about communicating an idea by building a prototype that is more like a graphite pen sketch than this perfect rendering or computer model. Even though you actually can experience some interesting spatial. Let's see. For me, I immediately see humans when I build shapes like this. It's an old person walking around here. I see a hunch like that.
So Eric, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
You know, and I know you don't remember them all, but for the Sustainable Development Goals, what is one that you constantly think about as a mechanical engineer in the work you do? Do you remember which one that you like the most, that you always want to try to constantly accomplish and achieve? I can also help you remember.
I mean, no, for me, obviously as an engineer, I just want to engineer the future solutions that would, for example, reduce the material flow. For me, material flow and where both how much we pull out of on the ground and stuff, and how much we put back and closing our loops I wouldn't say that it's perfectly aligned in the goals, but it's for me, I'm much more focused at sustainability in terms of materials right now, just because from when you look at everything we need to make, resources are pretty scarce, and that's where the big problems will end up in the future. So I'm focusing on that side. I don't know if that makes any sense to you. So we actually can't really remember which one that would align best with of the goals right now.
It's number 12, responsible consumption and production.
Yeah.
That was that's part of it. I know what you're talking about is a little bit more than that.
Yeah.
But, you know, part of it is number 12, which I think is actually kind of the foundation of how you founded Strawbees with the sustainability station, the die cutter that produces Strawbees.
Yeah, exactly. And that was, for me, I don't know how many of you know the story of that invention of Strawbees and the reason that I did it the way I did it. But it was because I wanted to utilize materials that otherwise would have been just thrown away. All my projects were aimed at that. But then I also realized that spatial exploration gives you so much more, like to actually just, even, you don't always have to build prototypes, you just have to build. You don't even have to build the objects you're talking about in class. You can just have them building because your brain is activated by doing something in three-dimensional space. So I like, it's the future doodling. So you can discuss anything. You can use it to emphasize something in maths or in you know, it doesn't really matter what subject you're talking about as long as you're actually doodling, because you can see that that doodles help you. Of course, this can be very distracting if you're doing it in the wrong setting. If you're doodling with something that's bigger than the desk. Yeah. Now I'm building this complex high rise. This is actually how we work with architecture today. So now we have an outdoor space here on the middle floor, and then we have a little bit of balcony here, and that's a lot of the stuff you build to make a building dynamic and inviting and having lots of interesting areas. But as you see, we're still not even in the, because you have to build the building with balance. If you're doing it completely unbalanced, it's a bit of a problem, even though you're going large scale. But so I could just continue upwards here, and it's still going to be balanced. So I'm just stacking them for a while. But this is also fun. So for example, having a group just building a high rise for a high city and then showing what's inside this high rise. So I know the classic, there's an old disaster movie where they were supposed to have an entire city in a building. So you can have a city in a building exercise too. What are the needs for a human in a city? You know, you need a hospital department, you need a fire department, you need food, you need recreation, things like that. So I think that's actually also really interesting to put it into a dense thing. It's not necessarily macro scale like we talked about. Now stacking will be hard. It's more of a game to make it stack. But you get the general idea there. And when you were talking about the cramped experience before of a city, that's also something that's super interesting to investigate. Coming back to me here, sitting. So what I was going to come into before, when we started modeling these spaces or residential areas or combinations of modules of houses and stuff, is that I actually use some tricks using a camera or a live feed camera or something with a fisheye lens and coming down on the, so now I'm actually dismantling the tower. I'm sorry, I'm like the worst, these things. But I wanted to show you an experience of a city when you walk through it. So I've been doing that sometimes with in virtual reality, but I really like doing it with just physical objects. So I'm going to take you on a little trip here. So I'm going to keep one building, be a bit spectacular like that, and then we have some. I'm going to show you the table here.
Wonderful.
Oh, wrong.
It's okay. I think we're all learning how to use Zoom and video media. So there's always a learning experience that comes with it.
Let's just build a road that we can actually travel through here with some interesting houses and spaces and some high rises and a little. And then we can go on a journey. So I will now, this might be a bit hard on you, but I'm known for doing these Zoom meetings so people get a bit dizzy. But now you're going to become a human in my wireframe city.
I like that we get to be the citizen. This is a nice perspective, actually. I haven't even thought to try this.
That's why I love this thing to actually start. Then it would be better if you imagine that you have drawn the surfaces and doors and things and been playing around with just paper surfaces. You can experience the city a bit. And then you can say like, yeah, you see, it's a bit intimidating having a high rise here. So yeah, I don't know if you want to live in this city. Here, very cramped over here, don't you think? A bit tight. You can go to the left. Yeah, this is and there it's out. And there's the computer. And here's me. Now you're flying. But I mean, those experiences to actually explore what you've built to get, if you have an external webcam, you can do a lot of that stuff, but also you can film it in your, using your cell phone or it's actually just to be able to get low enough. That's usually the big problem, to get it on human perspective. I don't know if this is actually, I like building these sketch blocks to actually build an entire cityscape. So for example, starting by copying a place, for example, in your town, just basically copying what does it look like, not too close, but placing shapes there and then modifying it for something that you would like to be better. So playing around to understand. Copy to understand is one of my favorites. So, and then changing it.
Sam mentioned another really interesting point that looking from the aerial, ground level, side view, citizen, bird's eye view. So, how does it, and then thinking about the perspective of how does it appear to walk along the city for the citizen, or how does it look like to fly over it or to drive through it? So those different combinations of perspectives can actually help make your city even better. You're trying to take a more inclusive perspective, like thinking about in the eyes of someone else, even if it's a bird.
I think that's super interesting too. But obviously that's something we should be looking at. For example, when we build a new bridge in the city, it has to be pleasing. It also has to fit the skyline or enhance the skyline. Maybe there's many things, many ways of looking at it. But I just want to start those discussions that these are very complex things, and a lot of times, as you can see, or at least here in Gothenburg, we've been pretty boring with it, and that's why I want to start with these kind of not so fun shapes. But then you add dimensionality to them. Then you can add the roof, slanted roofs. You start doing these dissections and remodeling it, because you can model it over time without having to lock down an idea. What the entire idea with Strawbees is, just like some comments have been here, is being able to change it all the time. It's not a fixed system. It's basically like resketching it, changing it a bit, and because they all connect to each other. That's actually one of the things that I wanted to solve with the clip, was to be able to attach shapes that might not fit perfectly together, for example. That's really fun. But I just wanted to, I'm going to put that up there. I just wanted to show how we really just build on the macro scale. We just build lots of buildings, and we start looking at it, and repetitions, and what repetitions look nice. And then you, as Sam said, what looks nice from the aerial view, what looks nice walking through, what is efficient in terms of human flow, just discussing it, and what you would think would be good, etc. So then you can look at different places, and it's actually fun to look at aerial views from different towns. I don't know how many of you know about Milton Keynes in England. Anybody know about that city?
No, I don't know.
That's one of the super engineered cities that we're only thinking about flow. So there's all these roundabouts, and it's super weird, but it's a combo of roundabouts and grids, and it looks super crazy from the air, and it's very strange to live there apparently. I haven't been there that much, but there's lots of these extreme cases that you can look at. So I really like Amsterdam city layout. It's one of my favorites. Very few, not so much space for cars, just walking around, biking. You have bike highways and stuff like that. So from my point of view, that's one of my favorite like planned cities. So you have shops and small convenience stores on every corner. It's very interesting in terms of how a city becomes very living, or every part of the city is living. There's no real center. The entire thing is a strange center.
Mm-hmm. What we were mentioning in part one a couple of weeks ago was, looking on Google Maps. Google Maps is probably a really nice inspirational tool to use for figuring out layout, like the grid system, circular motion, or even like cities, especially Amsterdam, or even like Netherlands itself. Netherlands is actually very well designed, where it's a massive grid system throughout the whole country, I think, because of the rising levels of water. So you have to disperse the water throughout the whole country. And I think Netherlands is actually a really good example of not just a city, but country building with the grid system.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. Do you see how I connected? I got a question there for the connection of the cubes using standard pieces. You see, I'm overlapping them in different ways to be able to create this more dynamic shape of a building. So you see, I'm not connecting them in corners. I'm connecting them in sliding on top of each other. I don't know if you get it, if it's any clearer this way.
Yeah. So what we were showing in the tower stacking, was we were using these two-legged Strawbees.
Yeah.
These two-legged Strawbees to connect the cubes and the pyramid, and putting it through the threes, the holes of the threes. But what Eric was doing was, instead of using this two, he was using a one-legged Strawbee.
Yeah, you see, in different ways. I actually showed a lot of tricks because basically just squeezing them into each other like that. So as you see, one is going from the sliding on sliding on the connector going into the three, and on the other one you have it sliding on the other leg going into the three. So that means you can actually connect shapes that don't perfectly match or not corner to corner, which is also interesting because this obviously is a bit more complex shape. Now it looks weird, but I actually used the other way in the bottom. I used the twos in the bottom. Yeah, but that's one of the rules with Strawbees is make your own rules and don't care how you're supposed to make it, just make it work somehow. And I've seen kids really just, it's very, very allowing for these experimental ways of connecting things. So I know some smaller kids, they actually started building, if they have these stacking cubes, for example, they thought it was too hard. If I want to stack these two, let's see if I can focus down on the table. Now, sorry for the shot there, but there we are. If I want to stack these, you can actually use the pipes, and they thought it was easier to use the pipes to put them together. So if you take...
Oh, how interesting.
Yeah. So you can use the short pipes as connectors of corners. And that's kid invented. It's not supposed to, you're not supposed to do that, which is why I loved it, because my favorite experience with Strawbees is being surprised by kids figuring out ways of doing things that you hadn't figured out. So they enhanced the system by showing. So you see, because that's actually it's a very strong and good connection. Now you only need to do 2 points.
Well, I think what's important is that, I think actually Sam Yancey in his webinar that he had with Sam Labs, he said it very beautifully, that you think of Strawbees as kind of like crayons, Play-Doh, cardboard. There really isn't any instructions to those materials. And that's kind of what we're trying to show with the city building aspect, that there's many different ways to connect, the different shapes together, the very modular shapes. I mean, there is no right way. We just give you the tools to get started, of course. But using just the straws in a replacement of the connectors is actually a really easy, brilliant way of using it. So in a way, you think of the straws as kind of more of the bars for, for the wireframe, but actually using the wireframe as the connector, different thinking.
Yeah.
So we are we are getting close to the end of the planar. So I just want to do a quick preview of my cityscape here. So I have like a live city that, I've built, but I also will share photos after. But another thing I want to talk about is that, you can build some very basic shapes like the cubes, but you can also look around your house for some packaging materials. So, fruit packaging or packaging for any sort of food carton you can use as a building. So I can actually place this, although it's black on black, so maybe it might be a little hard to see, but roughly I can use this as a very abstraction of a building, just kind of like the cubes. And I can actually put, things like toilet paper rolls and, basically an abundance of a lot of upcycled materials, probably collecting in our own households. So in a way you can actually encourage your students at home, especially if they're practicing distance learning, hands-on experiences, to do a scavenger hunt at home. So even finding bottles, like bottles are really nice natural towers that you can use to build. And you can even just put a little bit of paper around the labeling, and then you can, place it, and it could just be a very simple tower. But of course, I think also I agree, we might want to space out our cities. Like I think my city is a little bit too crowded. So I think I need a bigger kitchen table. So thank you everyone for joining us this week, part 3 of the city building and the sustainable development goals, part 3. So we really appreciate you joining this class and having Eric join us. So as usual, we will record. We've recorded this webinar and we will be placing it online on our Strawbees Learning YouTube channel, as well as posting any slides and resources, including all the links shared in the chat. So thank you very much for joining us. Eric, do you have any final goodbyes or anything you want to mention?
No, not quite. I was actually, no, thank you very much for joining us or for being in my state. It was really fun to just explore this and test some new technology here, but I'd love to do more building with some of you and showing some of my tricks for actually just sketching through. I think I would like to build with most people because that's the way I explain best, or like, when I have a class, one thing that I focus on is building on my own. So I build because that way I can't really help that many people, but they look at what I'm doing and they take, I'm learning, like that's a different kind of learning, and I really love that. So having to talk about the things that I do when I'm usually building it's a really interesting challenge for me. So that's why it might not make perfect sense everywhere, but I enjoyed it, and I hope to keep improving on that too.
Well, I think we all appreciate your process because once again, it's great to learn from the inventor of Strawbees himself and his process.
Just one thing that I would like to mention was the wonderful, you saw the big tower, the most stable tower there, the yellow and blue one. That appeared when I was very, very tired giving a lecture. And I was so tired, so I zipped it up wrong. I was going to zip up the green tower. So they're actually the same parts inside those two towers. I was just so tired that, once when you're you're buttoning up your shirt. Yeah, we're actually very close to ending it now, but I would love to show it if anybody wants to see it.
Well, I think we'll have to share it next time because I want to make sure that we have enough time. But if there's any photos or any video media, perhaps we can put it into the resource slides.
That's one of my favorite features with it. It makes room for so much serendipity and happy accidents, and it's one of the few tools that actually allows that. But morphing, weird, that they're so malleable and modifiable is my favorite feature. So, yeah.
Well, let's talk about it next time. Let's expand on this idea. I think it's a great aspect because again, the very large towers, I think everyone appreciated learning about today.
Scale is engaging.
Yes, it is. All right. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy and have a nice day.
Thank you.